We're going to have a short session of about 1 hour. 45 minutes will be presentations, and then we have time for Q&A. Everybody is welcome to write their questions at either Q&A or chat. We'll take the most generic questions and answer them in public. And of course, everybody is welcome to follow up privately. And let's get rolling. It's really exciting. It's the first time we have Deutsche Börse here in Israel. And I want to tell you a story about how this webinar came to be. A few months ago, I've heard about the scale segment, a new segment established by the Deutsche Börse for younger companies to list there. The Deutsche Börse, which is home to some of the largest and most respectable firms in Europe, has now opened its gates to younger companies. I called the Deutsche Börse, and Natalie, VP of Pre-IPO and Capital Markets, picked the phone. I'm pretty confident it took her a few minutes to try and understand who was the lady with a funny accent on the other side of the phone. But fairly quickly, we established how relevant this was for the startup nation, for Israeli companies to list in Deutsche Börse. And this is how this webinar came to life. But before we dive into the specifics of Deutsche Börse and scale segments, I want to present in high level my view on why would an Israeli company consider listing in a foreign exchange, and some of the considerations involved. So something about myself. I'm an IPO consultant. I help Israeli companies select the right stock exchange to list, and I take them through the process. Sorry. So first, the dream. If you were to ask an Israeli kid, a boy or a girl, what would they want to be when they grow up? Probably half of them will say IPO. Why? Well, IPO is not necessarily an exit event, but it's definitely a route to funds, and it's easier to follow up on additional fundraising when the company delivers. Furthermore, when you become an international traded company, it is much easier for large companies, large customers, governmental institutes to make business with you versus an Israeli private company. It's also easier to invest in such a company. Another important factor is the fact that your share becomes a coin. It means you can leverage the coin or the share with option plan and get better employees, high quality human resources. You can buy companies by using share and not coin, not cash. And you as a founder, as well as your investor, can realize some of the holding without giving up control. And also very important, when you list, you get a flat share structure, and you don't have preferred investors, and you don't have to adhere with VC's strict timelines to actually realizing the investment. So how do you select the right stock exchange? Two main considerations are geographical location and preferences. If your main audience, your main customers reside in German-speaking countries, then the Deutsche Börse is definitely a route to consider. You both arrive to the region, and you can support the investors and the media in their native language. But beforehand, it is important to check both the minimal requirement of the regulator, as well as the local investor types and preferences. So how do you prepare for an international IPO? The other speakers will elaborate on that. Just in high level, we are talking about preparing international standard financial reports. We need to prepare to legal due diligence, and we need to prepare the marketing materials that go into the prospectus and the presentation. So now that we've reviewed the very high level on what to consider when going public and about Deutsche Börse, I'm very happy to hand over to Natalie Richards, VP, and Florian Kurtz, Key Account Manager from the pre-IPO and capital markets. So you can introduce yourself and I will open your presentation. Natalie, please unmute yourself and I'm opening your presentation.
Thanks, Ruth. Hello, everybody. My name is Natalie. I'm working at the DBG at our pre-IPO and capital markets team. And we develop services and support companies on their way to IPO and after an IPO. And I do that now for over 10 years. I met Ruth a year ago, digital, and we are very happy today that we can give you, together with Anna, Nia, and Ruth, an overview of the opportunity of a listing in Frankfurt. In the next 10 minutes, my colleague Florian and I want to show you some insights about an IPO and the advantages of a listing in Frankfurt. Let's start. Perfect, thanks. Only some facts on the beginning about IPOs. Did you know that the 10 largest companies in the world are listed? And we have globally more than 1,000 IPOs a year. And when you think about private markets, yes, you get their money. But for example, in Germany, investors, 60% of private equity investors want to cash out after 5 years. And this is why we want to talk to you about long-term financing about an IPO. There are numerous reasons for an IPO. Every company has its own situation and goals. In Frankfurt, we have no sector focus. Last year, for example, we have the largest tech IPO in Europe. And tomorrow, we celebrate an IPO of tech e-commerce company called Fashionette. They, for example, want to increase awareness in Europe to becoming a leading e-commerce platform. I will only single out one of the many reasons: growth financing. Digitalization requires investments. Some are difficult to implement through banks. An IPO enables repeatable rounds with large volumes via capital increase afterwards. And investors love growth. And on the other side, you gain reputation if you want to increase awareness in Europe. Let's get on the next slide. At DBG, we offer tailored market segments to provide capital for companies of all sizes and sectors. We have segments in the EU regulated market. That's for mid and large cap companies. That's the general on the prime side on the left side. And we have scale, a young segment especially designed for growth and small and medium-sized companies. It's exchange regulated. That means we make the rules. Let's take a look at scale. We introduced scale 3 years ago. I was in the team. Actually, we have 50 companies in scale. No company from Israel. Today, we want to spark your interest. Most important thing, we have special inclusion requirements and services for SMEs. We have aligned ourselves with the market. That means we speak to investors and market participants, find out what the market expects and what information is relevant so that they can invest in growth companies. We have developed supporting services that are based on market requirements. Most important is our research report, especially for SME companies. Every company in scale has an English research report from Edison. We also translate it into German. And the research is shared to investors in over 100 countries, UK, US, and Europe. Interesting fact, Edison has a team in Israel too. That means they understand the Israel companies. The research for Israeli companies is healthcare and tech sector and done by teams in London and New York. Another interesting service we have is Direct Place. Direct Place is a subscription functionality. We in Germany are able to bring retail business into a transaction. Institutional investors, you get by the bank. We at the DBG are marketing the upcoming IPO in well-known financial media during the subscription phase and give issuers a broader investor base at an early stage. You as company can expand your investor base by targeting retail investors. Then you have more independence from individual investors through a diversified investor mix, higher liquidity of your security and trading, and in the end, increased brand recognition for your company with the capital market and in general public. You need partners in Israel, and on the other side, you need partners in Germany. And we have there our experts, and most important, we have the last trading platform in Europe, the last trading room. And when you celebrate there, it's not only an event, you can gain media attention in Europe. You receive the presentation after the webinar, and there we have a link with an interesting video from our IPO ceremonies. Now, I want to hand over to my colleague, Florian.
Hello from my side. Thanks at first, Ruth, for the warm introduction, and Natalie for the first part of our presentation. My name is Florian. I work for Deutsche Börse almost like 1 year, having banking experience in the time before. And now I will go on with page 6 with the strong presence of international investors in Germany. Yes, companies reach a broad international group of investors with an IPO in Germany. And as you can see on the left side, HelloFresh, it's a German company, and it has just 20% domestic shareholders. The other 80% are foreign investors from Europe and global, mainly from the US and from the United Kingdom. And the market capitalization increased from 1.7 billion euros at the time of the IPO in November 2017, and to more than 8 billion euros today. In the middle, you can see a global fashion group. A large amount of shares belong to a Swedish holding company and the German investor Rocket Internet. Therefore, the company is strongly positioned in its home markets in Sweden. And yeah, 85% of its shareholders are Swedish and German. And the market capitalization of the online retailer increased from 950 million to currently 1.77 billion. And the last company on the right side is Home24. It's an online mail order company from Germany. It holds a very broadly diversified shareholder structure. from which nearly 50%, as you can see, are from the US. And the other half contains especially investors from Europe. At the bottom of the page, you can see that we have a strong presence of international investors in Germany, which can also be seen by the names of the companies, such as big players like BlackRock. And I can add that we have the newest and the recent trading system T7 here at Deutsche Börse, and we can see more than 180 trading participants at this system. So Ruth, it would be nice if you can go on to the next slide. Yes, slide 7. It's you can see that on the left side, Deutsche Börse. We at Deutsche Börse, 18% of the listed companies are tech companies. In comparison to the biggest other stock exchanges like Nasdaq or London Stock Exchange, they have just 11 or 8% tech companies. And the classification as a tech company follows the GICS classification. It's called Global Industry Classification Standard. And yeah, I can say that therefore we at Deutsche Börse are experts at dealing with tech companies and their needs. And the chart at the bottom shows the distribution of listed tech companies by their market capitalization. And Deutsche Börse is equally distributed across small, medium-sized and big tech companies, as you can see. And thereby the focus is on small and medium-sized companies, which account for 75% of the market capitalization. And yeah, it underlines that DBAG is also well experienced and perfectly suitable point of contact for SME companies. Yes, so we can go on with the next slide. Let's have a look at the performance of a selection of various tech companies that went public during the last decades. From the lowest share price performance of 170% of the RIB software SE to the strongest performance on the right side of Lotto24 AG with 587%, we can see many high percentage growth. All 6 companies showed a strong performance as well. This underlines the positive trends within the tech sector here at Deutsche Börse, that a listing in Frankfurt can be attractive for tech companies. And the latest IPO in Frankfurt was Compleo Charging Solutions. It was also a tech company, and they produce electric charging stations for cars or vehicles and deliver them across over 15 countries, mainly in Europe, and the majority in their German home market. Let's have a look at the last page. Capital market readiness by Deutsche Börse. Let us end with a short overview or a sum up of our services. With, for example, trainings, podcasts, or exclusive workshops. We support companies already in the very early stage of preparation of a potential IPO. Besides, we offer them access to our networks, such as our Capital Market Partner Network or the DBVN. It's called the Deutsche Börse Venture Network. Especially the DBVN has currently more than 600 members across Europe. The network offers investors highly quality investment opportunities in companies from the early on to the late growth stage. Yes, this was a quick presentation of Frankfurt Stock Exchange and the advantages of being listed here in Frankfurt. We would be delighted to welcome you as one of the first Israeli companies to ring the bell at our trading floor here in Frankfurt. And I would like to hand over to Anna from Pearl & Cohen.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation. I once heard the professor saying that he who uses PowerPoint has no power and no point, but at this time of age that we only have the Zoom, I have no choice but to share the presentation. Sorry. Ruth, do you want to share my presentation or can I do it?
You can do it, Anna.
Okay. But for some reason, it doesn't.
I can do it if needed.
Do you have it?
Yes, I have it.
Okay.
I will share it in a minute.
Okay. So until Ruth shares my presentation, I just want to say something, present myself. My name is Anna Moshe. I'm a senior partner in Pearl Cohen. I'm an attorney. Nothing I can do about it. Happens to the best. And I'm not going to bore you with legal mambo jumbo. I'm going to talk tachlis. I always say in my lectures that the only word that we need to know how to translate to other languages, and we really can't, is the word tachlis. It's much more concise than bottom line, but this is it. Okay, first slide, you can go down. First slide. Now, much have been spoken, okay, we'll talk about the firm later. We're a big firm with a lot of offices all over the world. Done. We can go to the next one. Also not interesting. Next one. Thank you. Okay, everybody spoke about why is it good to do IPO, to go and raise money on the stock exchange. But I just want to say one thing, and that's the last one. IPO is a matter of fashion. There are years that IPOs are booming and people are interested to invest in public companies, and there are years that not so much. Now, the stock exchanges are booming, and it's a very, very good time for a company that's ready to list, but maybe not already totally developed, but in a matter of speech, startup still, to go public under certain circumstances. Next slide, please. Okay, so, you know, Israelis, because of our culture and how we're built, we place premium on risk taking. This is why I deal with startups from seed to exit for 26 years. And usually when a company comes to me, the legal staff chases the actual, business, the transactions and so on. So when we think about going public, before we even start the pre-IPO or any kind of raising or start the due diligence, we need to make sure a few things. We need to make sure that there are no tax issues that are outstanding and might be problematic. We need to make sure that when we start to be active somewhere, new place, Germany, Europe, or whatever, the IP is protected and all assignment issues are done. And we need to make sure that we're in compliance with existing agreements and laws, because if we start the process and start engaging the bandwidth of the management and start spending money on attorneys, which is a good thing, of course, and other service providers, we might find ourselves in a problem if we have not been, compliant with important things. We need to make sure that in the article of association and our existing shareholders, we don't have any kind of estoppel or don't have a problem with going public. Next, please. Okay, what are the applicable legislation for a company, Israeli company, that would like to IPO? First of all, the securities law, the Israeli securities law, Chok ניירות Erech, the joint investment trust law, the company's law, which is applicable to a company anyway. But when we go public on a foreign exchange, and it doesn't matter if it's the Deutsche Börse or the ASX on the London Stock Exchange, there are also the local laws and regulation. And it's different in case you're an Israeli company that is IPOing on that stock exchange, which means it's called overseas company, or you're a local corporate, for example, a German corporate holding in 100% the Israeli corporate, and the IP stays in Israel. So the laws that are applicable are a bit different. Or if it's an RTO, for example, when you merge into an existing shell and so on. Also, the set of laws changes a bit. Next, please. Okay, so what's the most important thing when you start to go forward? You need to make sure that your team is in place. The management cannot handle all the process by itself, because if it's going to do everything by itself, it wouldn't be able to manage the company to sell and so on. So you need to make sure that you have the right advisors, that you have the board of directors that is good, or that the investors in the certain place that you're IPOing will be happy with. And you need to make sure that the management is really strong, because the management is the one that is going to be selling the company to the investors and also maintaining the relationship. very important, when you're trying to select the broker, and this is, I would say, most important thing, because after this seminar, some of you that are considering maybe to IPO in Germany would probably touch base with Ruth and say, can you introduce me to brokers who would be happy to take my company and introduce us to local investors? And when you get from them the agreement, there are certain things that you must look at. First of all, we need to understand whether the IPO, whether the broker gives us a firm commitment or is just the best effort. We need to make sure that the first refusal section, and there's always one like that with the good underwriters or brokers, what does it mean? Does it mean that that they have to do the next round, that they have a certain period to agree with you, and so on? Whether they have exclusivity, for how long, and how can you terminate the agreement? Because as I always say, you need to get to know how you get out when you go in of anything. If there's a breakup fee, it's very important to make sure when and what you pay if you get out of the agreement and under which circumstances. The most important thing is when you're a young company without many monetary resources, we need to understand whether that underwriter can get us some pre-IPO funds, a mezzanine convertible loan or something like that, because you want all the process of the IPO to be funded by a pre-IPO funding. And it's also good to have already local investors in the pre-IPO round, because that way they will be interested to support you in the IPO itself because they're already invested. Next, please. Okay, so the IPO process. Pre-IPO funding. We need to understand whether the pre-IPO funding is through a convertible loan or it's a direct investment. It also has to do with the fact whether we are taking public the Israeli company or we're having a local company incorporated, and then we do a stock swap so that the shareholders of the Israeli company will hold eventually the local company. Next, please. Tax. When we plan, whatever we plan, however we plan to IPO, it's very important to plan it ahead of time in a correct way. For example, if we do an RTO, go into we merge into an existing traded shell, or we are establishing a new company, and then we would like to have a stock swap. For all these matters, we would have to have, Nir will talk about it, so I'm not going to waste time, but you will go to Nir and he will build for you the right structure. On many stock exchanges, before the prospectus, you are required to submit or can submit some kind of a preliminary application. A preliminary application is very important because then you can understand what would be the approach, and the stock exchange would help you understand what would be the points that the local investor would look at. It would save you a lot of time and money. But a very important point would be that the preliminary application or the preliminary questioning needs to be compatible with the final prospectus. Next slide, please. No? Yes. Okay. Most important thing. It's very difficult for startups, Israeli startups, and many companies that are already making money are still startups, because a startup is a very fluid definition, and it doesn't mean that you don't make money. It means a lot of other things, but it's very difficult for an Israeli young company to switch its state of mind and to go and be public after a long time of handling everything like a startup, because the hard work begins after the IPO. Usually the founders and many people that have interest are locked for at least 2 years. So you need to make sure, and also to have the investors fund you again and again, you need to make sure that they believe in the company and that the company is delivering. And if it's not delivering, you need to communicate why and when and where and how it will deliver. So the ongoing obligations, there are not just reports that you need to submit. This is very hard work that starts from within the company, and many times we assist establish it. Next, please. Okay, this is the last slide. I want to show you something very interesting that will help you probably to communicate with your investors. This is a table that shows a kind of a spread of the way that we think and discuss and do business. If you see, this is, if you notice, it's emotionally expressive people, confrontational, and not so emotionally expressive, and people who avoid confrontation. Israel, Russia, and France are very close together. But Germany, if you note, are much less confrontational and much less emotionally expressive. So when you deal with a German investor, you need to make sure that you understand how to speak to them and what to do. Next, please. Okay, that's not interesting for this. We don't have time. Next. This is me. I'm happy to answer any question. And remember, the most important thing is to understand that this is a very good time to get investors from Germany and from Europe, invest in a good Israeli company in a tech section of developing companies, and we will be happy to help you do that. Thank you so much. And Nir, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Anna. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to share my presentation. Right. So again, good afternoon, everybody. We heard about the IPO process. We heard about the Deutsche Börse. We had the important stuff from the legal perspective from Anna. And now what I would like to do is to cover together the financial aspect of the IPO process. Just a few words about myself. Nir Yeni, a partner with Fan Kane, Grant Thornton Israel, dealing mainly with public company with international operation and high-tech company as well. For my experience, usually we find several points which are key for successful IPO, definitely when we are dealing with IPO abroad. Public company financial statement disclosure. Most of the companies we are dealing with today are small companies or high-tech companies. Usually you submit your financial statement to the tax authority or to the bank. When it comes to financial statements of a public company, it's a different animal than the usual financial statements that we do locally. It's the disclosure is much wider and is challenging. As a result, management has to evaluate whether they are able to deal with it by themselves or may have used specific assistance of somebody which will deal with the financial statements preparation. Reporting in accordance with the International Financial Reporting Standard, what we call IFRS. Again, as a private company, we report the financial statements in accordance with local GAAP, Israeli GAAP, and IFRS, the International Financial Reporting, is a must for all public companies, and definitely when you go public. Even when it relates to young companies, we usually have several examples that the accounting is different than under the IFRS than the Israeli GAAP. For example, we have the grants from Innovation Authority, actuarial analysis of severance liability, complicated equity, and other stuff, good stuff usually. And again, management has to evaluate if they have the ability to deal with it by themselves or may use the assistance of some of specific person. The finance team is expected to assist with the audit. We are talking about audit of a 3-year period. It is challenging. It is usually full with a lot of frustration. The financing team or the CFO decision whether he has enough resources and the qualification of his team to assist with the financial statements audit, or he may use assistance. It is important, as we heard earlier in this webinar, sometimes to use IPO assistance such as Root, because on top of the audit itself, the finance team is expected to report to senior management with internal reports, to provide the broker and investors with many analysis on top of the day-to-day basis. So in order to make sure that the financial statements will be finalized, it is challenging work. And what's important that to do the evaluation in the beginnings to avoid any last-minute surprise. When we talk about Germany, it's important to, or the German bourse, it's important to keep in mind that a German holding must be incorporated and be listed. So we cannot list the Israeli company. And that brings some items which are important from tax perspective. And the reason I'm saying it because the idea is really to address it in advance and to avoid any problems. I outlined the more important of them. Tax pre-ruling, for example, we will have to approach the Israeli tax authority in advance to avoid any tax event, because the shareholder of the Israeli company will have to transfer the shares in the Israeli company to the German new corp incorporated and avoid any tax event or defer the tax event. Grant of stock options. Stock options is a very important mechanism to motivate, as we all are familiar, the employees. And in order to maximize this incentive, it's really imperative to do the grant of stock options at least 90 days before the IPO. Transfer pricing, again, it's another example of something that we need to plan in advance. It relates to transaction between the German company and the Israeli company. When I'm saying transaction, it could be loan, it could be services. It doesn't really matter what type of transaction, but the idea that it's important for the tax authority or from a tax perspective that it will be in a market pricing. And that's why we do a transfer pricing study. And last but not least, in terms of the taxes, we have the control and management. It's important that the German company will not be controlled or will not be viewed by the tax authority that it's controlled and managed from Israel, because if it does, so then the taxation of the German company will be as if it's Israeli company. Besides these points, I think that there are a few more, I guess, at a very high level, I guess, recommendation or things to keep in mind from the beginning. One of them is realistic timing. The reason I'm saying realistic timing, because from my experience, and it's not because we are Israeli, but it happens because it usually happens. We need to understand or to evaluate what is a realistic timing. Audit of 3 years cannot be done within 1 month. It's not doable. You need also to put together a prospectus. So management together with the advisor has to put together a realistic timing and try to stick to it. By using sometimes consultant or IPO consultant, it will be easier to stick to that timing. But definitely it will save some frustration if we don't take it into consideration from the beginning. In terms of cost, of course, everybody likes the cost which are built only at the success factors, but this is not it cannot be, of course. So it's important to understand before you start the IPO process what cost could be billed only if a success is achieved. And of course, when we start an IPO process or when we go to do an IPO, of course, we are making every effort to do it successfully. But in order to avoid any miscommunication, it's important that to know that this process is costly, and to bifurcate between cost which has to be incurred no matter what happens, and cost that could be incurred only upon success. Last but not least, relates to the corporate governance. When a company goes public, it really moves from the private world to the public world. It's enormous change. When you're a private company, the corporate governance may be less important, maybe because it's a young company or small company. When you are doing an IPO, the term corporate governance becomes very important, whether it's include the audit committee, the board of directors of it we heard by Hannah, in order to make sure that we have those policy and procedures in place to make sure that we as a public company will be able to do the required reporting in a proper manner and correctly at the right time. This is, I think, what I wanted to emphasize and maximize your success in the IPO process. If you have any other questions beside having the Q&A session that we'll have in a few seconds, or the chat, I'll be more than happy to address anything offline. And with your permission, I would move it back to Ruth Palmon to address any questions we may have. Thanks again, and good afternoon.
Okay, thank you very much, Nir. After the call, or tomorrow, we're going to send the presentations to everyone, so you have it handy. And we have one question to you, Florian. It's from Will. I believe Will is Edison Israel that you've mentioned before.
Yes.
Can you please say something about the minimum admission conditions for listing on Scale?
Yeah, for sure. There are several admission conditions, like you need, as a potential issuer, you need inclusion documents with a public offer, valid and approved prospectus. You need a contract with a supporting Deutsche Börse capital market partner. The company history should be at least 2 years, and the estimated minimum market capitalization of 30 million at the time of the inclusion into trading. What can I say more? Yeah, at least a 20% free float factor, or at least 1 million free float shares. And it's really important that you fulfill at least 3 criteria of a turnover at least 10 million euros, earnings of the last year of 0 euros, equity capital more than 0, and a number of employees, at least 20 employees or 20 people. And yeah, the cumulated equity capital before the IPO should be at least 5 million. But we can send a fact sheet to Scale as well, because I think it's very much information, so everybody can read that out at a later stage.
Yeah, I think it's 3 out of the 5 that you've mentioned, and please do add the information. We will distribute it to everyone. The second question, we will refer only to the first half of it. We're not competing with other stock exchanges, and everybody is good. Can you talk about non-German companies that are listed in Scale?
Yeah, for sure. We have, I guess, it's 3 non-listed, non-German companies in Scale from foreign countries, from Europe. Yeah, and we hope there are more to come.
Next one needs to be Israeli.
We hope so.
Okay, so unless we have other questions, I think we do not. Then, as I've said, tomorrow we will send you the presentation and the fact sheet from Deutsche Börse. And we thank our friends from Germany and everybody who participated and presented. And we look forward to answer any other questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Danke schön. Bye-bye.